It's going. Right, there we go. Hello. Kate Floss. A live video again today. It's taken a long time to get this video going. Right, wait for somebody to come in. If anybody comes in, say hi, Kate, and let me know. Hope someone will come and watch, but I'll just get this video done. I'm trying to get these videos done. I want to put out an SOS to the cancelled countries, New Zealand, Australia, Canada, England, and America. And I'm just letting you know that all of our Indigenous populations have been infiltrated since the 1700s. Since the 1700s, various groups have infiltrated all of the Indigenous populations, learned the language, and currently they're going through a process called decolonisation. Decolonisation is just exactly what happened in Africa. They're now going to do to our bicultural countries of Australia, New Zealand and Canada. But they're mostly starting in New Zealand because New Zealand has the smallest Indigenous population, our New Zealand Maori, and there aren't many left, and they've been manipulating our New Zealand Maori for hundreds of years. And what happened was in Africa, what they did was they put all the Indigenous lands into trusts, and then they wrote constitutions that banned any of those lands from being sold. And originally they brought thousands of white people to these countries to build the infrastructure and increase the value of the lands. In the meantime, they locked all the lands up for 200 years. These lands are now being released back to the Indigenous people. And as the devious powers that be hand the lands back, they buy all the lands back, and this is how they're going to take control of our countries. So in order to understand that, we had to go right back. We did the Magna Carta, we did the 1688 Bill of Rights, and now we've got this thing, one of our treaties now, Australia and Canada. You might think, well, these are the treaties of New Zealand, so we don't have to look at those treaties, because we've got our own treaties and they're nothing to do, but they're all tied together. And if you don't understand what's going on with the treaties in New Zealand, you're not going to understand what's going on with the decolonisation movement in your countries. And this goes for England too, because in 1986, all of our constitutions in each of our English-speaking countries were removed. So we have to really get investigating this together. Don't think that New Zealand is separate from Canada or from Australia. What's happening in New Zealand is happening in Australia. Now, you know from Australia that we have to go right back, because in New Zealand they've got this thing called the Whakaputanga. And the Whakaputanga was signed in 1835, and the Whakaputanga was called the Magna Carta of New Zealand. Now, the Magna Carta of England put all of us into slavery under the power of the Catholic Church, the Jewish Church, and the barons and the elite, all right? And then the people came in 1688 and said, by the people, for the people, and threw them all out and brought in a proper parliament. Well, in 1835, all that fight that was going on between the people and the rulers of the Magna Carta, they all brought their fight to our countries of Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. There's a battle going on for these grounds back then. So what happened is, in this guy here, who he is called Samuel Marsden. Now, if you're from Australia, you'll know Samuel Marsden. Now, we have to go back. It's really important, if you're from Australia, that you understand this Whakaputanga, because in this year, 2018, 2019, 2020, these devious groups have gotten the Maori together and reinstated this whakaputanga. And it's in English, it's called the Declaration of Independence of Maori. But we're going to show you that the whakaputanga is the Magna Carta of New Zealand, and it is a heinous document. Heinous. And I'm going to explain to you why, and everybody's going to understand. Now what happened? Samuel Marsden. Oh, I've lost my... Did I lose a bit of paper? Samuel Marsden in 19... Oh, goodness me. I haven't. Okay. Here we go. Now, this is not going to be a perfect video. I don't make perfect videos, but I'm just trying to get the information out there as best I can. When we get all the information out there, we can put it all together and make a perfect video. But for now, I'm just giving you the information as I get it, because we have got to move at warp speed. They're bringing in this faggot. They're going to make New Zealand a republic. And once they make New Zealand a republic, the whole Commonwealth is going to fall apart. And it really is. New Zealand is the first to fall. Australia's next. Canada and Australia at the same time, really. But New Zealand's the first to fall, okay? Now, Samuel Marsden, in 1790, he belonged to a society called the Eland Society in England. And this was a Christian society that paid for young people to go to university and to study to be missionaries. And they sent these missionaries out to Canada, Australia, Africa, and New Zealand. These missionaries were specifically to go to the English-speaking countries to control the thousands of peon slaves that they were going to send there to build the infrastructure and increase the value of the land. So this Eland Society, thank you. Oh, I'm glad to have you here, Kim. It's just nice to have one. All right, here's Samuel Marsden. And so this Eland Society would pay for these missionaries to go to train at the university, and then they would send them to our countries of Australia, New Zealand, and Canada. They sent this Marsden. He was a cruel man, and they sent him to Australia in 1993 after 3 years at the Cambridge University. Remember the Cambridge Magdalena University. That's an important thing to remember because it's going to come up later. The Cambridge Magdalena University, and in 1993 they shipped him out to Australia, and he was to be a magistrate and to control all of the Catholic Irish convicts that were going to be sent to Australia. And he infiltrated all the Aboriginal populations, is what he did. They weren't too bothered about New Zealand at that time. Now, another guy came along. I don't have a picture of him, but he was a young Maori guy. Oh, before I go to there, I want you to remember this guy here. This guy here is called Jackie Marmon. Now, he's going to come up later, but you want to remember Jackie Marmon. And he was the son of a man called Patrick Marmon. And Patrick Marmon was an Irish Catholic, and he was fighting Northern Ireland. He wanted Ireland to be a republic. So he was fighting Northern Ireland, and Northern Ireland were Protestants, and they wanted Ireland to be under the 1688 Bill of Rights, under the monarchy, is what happened. So this is Jackie Marmon. Jackie Marmon, his father, Patrick Marmon, got sent to Australia in 1798. So Marsden and Patrick Marmon arrived in Australia within a few years of each other, okay? And Jackie Marmon was born in Australia. Now, he's going to come up again later, so you want to remember him, okay? Now, in 2005, well, I'll just talk about Jackie again. In 2005, when Jackie Marmon was only 5 years old, He was sent to New Zealand on the ships, and he was meeting up with Maoris all around the Bay of Islands. And this man here came out to be the most fluent white missionary. Eventually he became a missionary. He was the most fluent white missionary in Maori language, which seems very strange to me because his father was in Australia, and this is what the missionaries used to do, and they still do it today. They go and live in the countries, and they send their children intermixed with the native people, and it's the children that learn the language of the native people. Then the children grow up within the church, and these are the ones that get in the ear of the Indigenous people to get them to move out of their protection of being in the Commonwealth and to be republics, and that's how New Zealand's going to be taken over in the next couple of years if we don't wake up. Okay, so in 2005, a lot of things were going on. Jackie Marmon was going to New Zealand to infiltrate the Maori people and learn the Maori language. And I don't have a picture, so I drew a picture. This guy here is a Maori, and he's called Ruatara. And in 1805, Ruatara travels to Australia, and he meets up with Marsden, okay? Now, he meets up with Marsden, and Ruatara spends 2 years. In 1805, he spends 2 years in Australia with Marsden. And in 1807, Marsden and Ruatara, together, they go off to England, okay? And when they get to England, they meet up with this guy here called Thomas Kendall. Now, here's a strange one. In Thomas Kendall, in 1805, so Ruatara goes to meet Marsden in 1805, and Jackie Marmon is going to New Zealand to learn the Maori language in 1805, and this guy here, Kendall, pops up in England in 1805 as well. Now, he was 26 years old, and he turns up to the the Elaine Society closed, and it changed its name to be called the Church Missionary Society, which was called the CMS. Remember this CMS because it's going to come up all the time and even today. So the Elan Society changed to be the CMS, and he went to the CMS, and he said that he had a profound religious experience, and as soon as he had this apparent mysterious religious experience, he sold his business, he moved his family to another place, and in 1808, now remember, in 1808, both Ruatara, the Maori chief, and Marsden had arrived in England, and in 1808 he asks the Church Missionary Society if they will send him to New Zealand to be a missionary in England, in New Zealand. So it's really important that you remember, so you've got Marsden, Kendall and Ruatara all together in England, all supported and paid for by the Church Missionary Society. This is in 1808, all right? And in 1805 is when Kendall apparently has his big spiritual experience. Ruatara goes to meet Marsden, all right? Now, Kendall is then chosen to be the missionary in New Zealand. So he was already chosen. And in 1809, they go on separate ships. They don't go on the same ship. But in 1813, Kendall, so Ruatara, he goes back to New Zealand at some point, and Marsden goes back to Australia, and Kendall ends up, what happened was, when they got back to Australia, Marsden bought his own ship, so he no longer used the ships that were provided by the Missionary Society, and he was no longer using the ships that were British ships that were all in Australia, sorting out Australia. He bought his own ship, and he and Kendall together turned up in New Zealand in 1813. And they brought horses from Australia and gave them, they brought many, many gifts and gave them to the New Zealand Maori people. And in 1814, his name's Samuel Marsden. Samuel Marsden gave his Christmas Day address. Okay, now we want to, around about 1814, Ruatara was then warned about the missionaries, and he was warned that they would take the country and reduce the Maori to be in a wretched condition. And Ruatara started to regret allowing the missionaries to come and settle in New Zealand. So he started to get angry because he realized that they were taking lots and lots of land and that he wasn't getting anything. So he demanded many products in payment for what he was doing. Okay, now all the other chiefs became very jealous of Ruatara because Ruatara had many, many weapons, and whenever the other chiefs came to complain to him, he would come and lay them out to the chiefs and more or less say to them, well, look, I've got these weapons. And the other chiefs kind of had no power. And what had happened was, just like what they're doing today, you can see exactly history repeating itself. They're doing exactly the same thing. They're giving hundreds of billions of dollars of gifts to New Zealand Maori and nothing to the Pākehā. And this causes jealousy and it causes hate. And this is how you pit people against each other. And this is how they pitted Ruatara and Hongi Hika against all the other chiefs. They gave them money, weapons, horses. They taught them agriculture. They gave everything only to these two chiefs and nothing to the other chiefs. All the other chiefs were left out in the cold, and they didn't know what was going on, and they became fearful. And the missionaries were setting all this up, the rotten buggers that they were. I never believed the Maori, that they were saying that the lands were stolen and all of that. And after reading all of this, I finally have realised that it fucking was stolen from them. It was. And it's horrible what was done to them, and it's horrible what's being done to them today. It's just terrible. So anyway, Ruatara became suspicious of the missionaries, but he was in so far deep that he started to get payment from them and everything like that. Now, so after that, in 1814, Marsden left New Zealand and he went back to Australia. This is not a perfect video. And in 1815, what happened was, in 1815, another guy went to Australia. I haven't got a picture of him either, but his name was Titor. And Titor was another Maori chief, and he went to Australia, and he also met with Marsden, and he spent 2 years with Marsden, and then he went to Australia in 1817. He went to Australia, and he went to England, and he was at the university where he met up with a man called Samuel Lee. Samuel Lee, I'm going to be talking about later, but he was the one that created all of the Maori dictionary. Now, you're going to find out later why they needed this Maori language so badly. The Maori language wasn't a written language, and whenever lands and resources, thousands and thousands of hectares were given to the missionaries by Hongi Hika and Ruatara and various Maori chiefs that they friended up with, they just gave them all these hectares of land, but it was never written on paper because there was no written Maori language. So it was a verbal agreement. Although the British wrote it in their English language, it wasn't written in Maori language. And if it wasn't written in Maori language, then it wasn't really legal in the eyes of the international community. So what they needed was this Maori language put into text. So they make out that it was such a friendly bendy thing to come and do this Maori language in a written text. But in fact, you'll see later why they needed it. 30 years later, why they needed this Maori language in written text. Okay, so Tito goes to Australia, and in addition, Hongi Hika goes to Australia as well, and both of them are meeting up with Marsden, and Kendall is there too. So they're all there, Tito, Hongi Hika, Marsden, and Kendall in Australia, and they come up with this thing called here. This is the first one. There's two of them actually. So this is the first one here, and it's called A Koreo no New Zealand, and it's called New Zealander's First Book. Now it's my understanding, I haven't seen it, you can't get copies of these books because they hide them, and they don't want you to see it because they don't want you to know the true Maori language is why. And they've inserted thousands of words into the Maori language that were never part of Maori language so that they can carry out their evil plans. Okay, so what do you want me to do? I'm doing my video. Now go. Now you've disrupted me. Okay, and anyway, where am I? So this, I think, perhaps just had the vocabulary, all the vocabulary of the Maori language. And when Tito went to England in 1817, he went to England and he met up with this guy here, Samuel Lee. Now I'm going to talk about Samuel Lee in a minute. Now when he got to England, it's possible because this first dictionary was written in 1815, right? And Samuel Lee produced a new dictionary with all the grammar and the way that the Maori language was structured. He produced that in 1820. Now you kind of have to remember these dates because there's a lot going on all at one time here. Okay, so in 1820, he wrote the language structure. So, and I know because I teach, and this is how you teach language. The first thing you do is teach the vocabulary. And after you've got all the verbs, so you teach nouns, verbs, adjectives first. And when you've got all of that, then you create your language structure and you learn how to put all of those vocabularies into the language structure. So this was a dictionary in progress. And so in 1820, the correct dictionary was produced by Samuel Lee. Now, I want to tell you a bit about this Samuel Lee. He's a bit of a dark character. It's very strange. Now, if you go back to remembering that in 1809, we had Kendall, we had Marsden, and we had Ruatara all in England. All right, the three of them together. And then in 1810, the Church Missionary Society, the same group, they commissioned Samuel Lee they sent him to the University of Cambridge, okay, in 1810. Now, he didn't meet Hongi Hika until 1820, but he met now let's see, he met Titor in 1817, and in 1810, it's possible, but not recorded, that he met Ruatara. It is possible that he met Ruatara, and then Ruatara, Kendall, and Marsden all go back to Australia, and then in 1815, they come up with the first beginnings of the dictionary, and then Titor goes back to England in 1815 to 1817, and Titor, when he leaves England, I can't find any records what he got up to. He just kind of disappears. But it's possible that he turns up in England in 1817, and by this time, Marsden had been at the Cambridge University for 7 years because he came in at 1810, all right? Now, here's something strange about Marsden. In 1823, okay, during the time from 1810 to 1823, he translated a book called the Book of Job. Now, this was like a Jewish Bible, and he translated the Jewish Bible, and he claimed that to have translated it from earlier transcripts, but he would not reveal his sources, okay? Now, you're going to have to remember this, because if you think of the Mormon church that's in New Zealand now, Joseph Smith in America, he also discovered transcripts, which he reckoned came to him. He also would not reveal the sources of his transcripts. So he's from a Jewish church as well. You're going to have to remember this, because America, Canada, New Zealand, all of this is all connected. All our countries are connected. All right, so you have to remember all of these things. America's got Joseph Smith. We had Samuel Lee. Well, Samuel Lee is the one that translated the Jewish Bible of Job, and he also translated a Bible called the Peshitta. The Peshitta is a Catholic script that came from the Hindi Catholic script. So you've got this guy here, I can't find him, Samuel Marsden, that met, Samuel Lee, who met Samuel Marsden, Kendall, Ruatara in 1810, possibly. And then he translates the Jewish Bible, the Catholic Bible, and before that, he's on the Maori script, working on the Maori script. So he was the person that coordinated all of the churches to get all of their language incorporated into the New Zealand Maori language. So from my understanding, in the 1800s, the Maori separated into different groups. One group went into the Missionary Society, one group went into the Catholic Society, and one group went into the Mormon, the Jehovah's Witness Society. And so they were kind of divided up into different groups, all right? And so that's what he did. Now, along comes here Hongi Hika. Now, Hongi Hika is been given a rough ride, I think. When you think about it, all the people that were surrounding him, he clearly was a true Indigenous person, but a very extremely clever Indigenous person, and he was very interested in other cultures and learning, but he was surrounded by many people. Marsden, Kendall, Ruatara, who was the chief above him, okay, and he was also surrounded by this guy here, Samuel Lee, and all these people were telling him the things that they were he was manipulated into doing what he did. He did a heinous thing, but he was manipulated into it by all of these people, and he's been given a really bad rap for what he did, which was heinous what he did. It was a massacre. But I personally don't think that he was on his own here. These people were all egging him on. Now, you'll find out why. It gets even worse. So Hongi Hika goes together with Kendall in 1820 to England, and they meet up with Samuel Marsden. Now, there's a bit of a story here. Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit about Hongi Hika, but you have to forgive him a little bit because he was manipulated. Now, in 1814, Hongi Hika goes to Australia and he meets Marsden, and they teach him military training. Now, why did they do that? They said that they didn't want him to fight, but they teach him military training. Go away from me. Take what? Go on. Goodness. Now I've forgotten. In 1814, he goes to meet Marsden, right? And he gets military training for 2 years. And then in 1812, he attacked a village with some muskets and he failed, all right? But in 1814, he goes and he gets military training with Marsden and Kendall. And in 1817, he attacked the Thames, and he took, what he learned was, if he attacked a village and he killed the chiefs and he took all of the people as slaves, then he was then the owner of the land, and he also could take the slaves and give them to the missionaries to work as agricultural slaves, and he swapped the slaves for more muskets and for more military power, is what he did. And the missionaries were not innocent in all of this. And then in 1818, he attacked the East Cape and the Bay of Plenty, and he destroyed 50 villages, and he captured 2,000 more slaves, and he took them back and exchanged them with the missionaries for guns and things that he wanted. Here's the interesting thing. In 1819, he gives 13,000 acres of land to the Christian Missionary Society, the CMS. He gave them 13,000 acres of land, but he actually gave a lot more, as you'll see later, how much land. He gave them thousands upon thousands, and so they had this little thing going where he would attack a small village, he would get the slaves, sell them to the missionaries for guns, and then he would go and attack other villages, and not only would he give them the slaves, he would also give them pieces, it looks like, he would give them pieces of the land that he had conquered. So I think there was some kind of an agreement going on here where they said to him, look, if you attack that village and you can have X amount of land and give us X amount of land, and we'll give you the weapons for doing it. That's what it's looking like to me, the rotten bastards that they were. And then all the other chiefs were like bewildered because they had no weapons. They only had their clubs. He was having guns and they only had clubs. And so that's why he was able to win all of the wars. Now, in the end, Hongi Hika never converted to Christianity, and Maori never converted to Christianity until after Hongi Hika's death. And at one stage, Kendall was saying that the New Zealand Maori, they had their own spiritual religion that they followed, and it was nothing to do with the Catholic Church, the Mormon Church, the Jehovah Church, or any of the churches. They had their own spiritual beliefs, and it's a pity that they've lost that, and I wish they could get it back. So Kendall described the Maori as having cosmological thought. And not long after he started talking about the Maori's own religion of cosmological thought, he was thrown out. Kendall. So they didn't want him there, okay? Now we're going to get to that particular piece later. So when Hongi Hika went to meet Marsden, it was in 1820 that the final dictionary was produced by Samuel Lee, which had all of the grammar and all of the structure of the Maori language. It's important that you remember all of these dates, right? And then Hongi Hika travels back to New Zealand. And Hongi Hika was killed in 1827, but not before he got up to small mischief. Now, when Hongi Hika met with Samuel Lee, he also met with a man called Charles Tyree. Now, Charles Tyree was the son of a man called, this man here was also Charles Tyree. He turned up in England many years previously, and he was a descendant of French kings. King Charles in France, he is in the direct line of kingsmanship to the kings of France. And if you remember, it was originally the kings of France that set up the Magna Carta, and it was them that were always attacking the British English-speaking people. The first kings of England were all French speakers, not English speakers, and the English speakers were considered the lowest of the low, okay? And so he turns up as Baron Charles Tyree, and he's not much him. You'll find out about him later. But this guy here, Charles Tyree, who is his son, all right, he was at the Cambridge Magdalene University, the same original university that Marsden went to, and the same society had paid Tyree to go to the Magdalene University and paid Samuel Marsden to go to the Magdalene University. They both went there paid by the Missionary Society, okay? And then suddenly, if you remember that Samuel Lee was in the Cambridge University, and Charles Tyree in 1820 suddenly turns up at the Cambridge University, and he reckons there's no records of it though. He reckons that he was transferred from the Magdalene University to the Cambridge University in 1820, and in 1820 Tyree met up with Kendall, and he met up with Samuel Lee. I can get them all here. And he met up with Hongi Hika. You see, Hongi Hika didn't have a chance. He really didn't. Poor Hongi Hika was stuck in England, a country that he knew nothing about, and he was at the beck and call of these three guys. He was a truly Indigenous person, I'd be scared shitless about it. He was away from his family. You know what Maoris are like and their family, the whānau. He's away from his family, and he was stuck there in England with these guys, and it gets worse as we go along. It just gets worse. So then Kendall gives Tyree 16,000 hectares of land that he had previously been given by Hongi Hika. Hongi Hika had given, first he'd given 13,000 acres to the church, but he apparently had given 16,000 hectares specifically to Kendall. Are you kidding me? And Kendall, well, there must have been more, because Kendall, you know, everyone, they're not going to give up all the land. So there must have been many more thousands of hectares than just the 16,000 hectares. The 16,000 hectares of land, Kendall gives it to Charles Tyree. Just gives it to them in exchange for 500 muskets. And Tyree sends the muskets to Australia. Now, Marsden reckons, I'll believe you, but thousands fucking wouldn't. Marsden reckons he had told Hongi Hika, I don't want you to have these weapons and all of these things. I mean, yet Kendall is at the university and Tyree gets sent there, and he exchanges 500 or 1,000 muskets for the 16 hectares of land. Now, Tyree is going to turn up later we don't hear anything about him, but in 1835, he's going to turn up. We're going to be talking about him later, so you better remember him. When we do the whakaputanga, which we can't do the whakaputanga today, we have to give you the background of the whakaputanga first. This is the background of how the New Zealand Declaration of Independence came to be. And it wasn't written by Maori. I'll tell you that much right now. That Billy Tikaka, he's saying that the whakaputanga was written by the New Zealand Maori. The Declaration of Independence was written by New Zealand Maori, but it wasn't. It was written by these guys. Now, in 1835, Tyree turns up again, and he proclaims himself the King of the Pacific Islands. And if you remember that he is supposedly a direct descendant of Baron Tyree, who is from the direct line of the French kings of King Charles the First or whatever, from the French. So we'll put them away for later, but he's going to come up later in 1835 in the next video, that Tyree. But just remember that Tyree got 16,000 hectares of New Zealand Maori land from Hongi Hika in exchange for 1,000, but it probably could have been more, muskets, and he sent them to Australia. And then Hongi Hika in 1821 travels to Australia and picks up all of his muskets, okay? So I'm going to be talking about, now, here's what happened. We're going to talk about Hongi Hika again, what he did. In 1812, he attacked the Hokianga, but he didn't have many muskets, and I think he lost. In 1814, Hongi Hika goes to Australia and he meets Marsden and he meets Kendall, and he undergoes 2 years of military training. In 1817, and he also helps them to prepare the first New Zealand Maori dictionary, but only the vocabulary, not the structure, okay? And then in 1817, he attacks the Thames and gets thousands of slaves. In 1818, he attacks the Bay of Plenty, and he brings down 50 villages, kills all their chiefs, and takes all their people for slaves and gives them to the missionaries. In 1819, he gives 13,000 acres of Hokianga to Kendall, well, to the missionary church. But as you know from Tyree, with the other 16,000 hectares, which is 40,000 acres, and it probably is on top of that. So there's probably a lot that we don't know about. And then in 1820, he goes to meet the king, and he meets Samuel Lee, and he meets Tyree, and he goes there with Kendall. In 1821, he comes back with thousands of muskets. And you remember that the missionaries didn't give, they were very clever. They didn't give muskets to any of the other chiefs. They only gave the muskets to Hongi Hika, Ruatara, and Titor from the Ngāpuhi tribe, only to that tribe. Nobody else got the muskets, you see, so they were really defenseless. All the chiefs were defenseless. And then in 1821 he returns. Now this is the most heinous time. He attacks the Ngati Paua chief on the Tamaki River, and it causes the deaths of thousands upon thousands of New Zealand Maori people. And Michael King said that this was like, it was a genocide, and more than the entire 25 years of the musket wars, more people were killed than the entire 25 years of the musket wars were killed in 1821 with Hongi Hika and his crowd. 2,000 slaves were taken back to the Bay of Islands. Then in 1824, he attacked the Whātua tribe. Now this is important. So all the tribes started to run. Everyone was on the run from Hongi Hika. And Hongi Hika gets all the blame, but if you look at the story and you know the people and how he was surrounded, you can see that he was just the puppet. He was the puppet of the Church Missionary Society. In my opinion, call me a liar. I don't want to get being called for libel or anything like that. But this is how I see it through Kate Floss's eyes, that I see all these Church Missionary Society surrounding Hongi Hika, surrounding Ruatara. They're getting them to give them thousands and thousands of hectares of land, and they're giving in exchange thousands of weapons, and they're taking many spoils of war. The spoils of war, they're getting lands, they're getting slaves, they're getting, and Hongi Hika's the great chief, because if you kill all the chiefs, then that land for your descendants forevermore belongs to your descendants forevermore, because the chiefs of the tribe that you attacked have been killed. And according to tribal law, the land is handed down from chief to son to son to son, the divine right of kings and the divine right of chiefs. So he attacked the Whātua tribe. Now the Whātua tribe, if you know New Zealand, they held all of Auckland, and he attacked them, and the Whātua tribe all ran out of Auckland. Okay? Now Hongi Hika left Auckland for 15 years. They took two Auckland harbours that were receiving all the ships. They were taken by Hongi Hika. I think Waitemata and Manukau Harbour were both taken by Hongi Hika. And Hongi Hika left the land for 15 years, although I don't really understand. It was left, Hongi Hika was killed in 1827. So 3 years after he took Auckland, in 1824, and then in 1835, the Whakaputanga, or the Declaration of Independence, was signed. Now, the Whātua tribe, William Hobson is the person that signed the Declaration of Independence, and he bought Auckland harbours for himself and the Church Missionary Society from the Whātua tribes. The Whātua tribe never ever went back to Auckland after Hongi Hika had attacked it. They just left and became dispersed all over the place, I suppose. So it's a very, very sad story what's happened here. But in 1822, this is where things started going a bit strange. So that happened in 1824. Hongi Hika was still rampaging all through the place, but England must have caught on to what the whole plot, it's like a whole plot that was going on here. And England must have caught on to what was going on in the Missionary Society too. So who knows if they were involved. I'm not really sure what was going on here, but in 1822, both Marsden and Kendall were thrown out on charges of exceeding their jurisdiction. If you remember that Kendall got his own ship, and he sent his own ship to New Zealand. It wasn't a missionary ship, and it wasn't an English ship. It was his own ship. And later, when we talk about the United Tribes flag, you're going to understand why they needed this flag, because Marsden had brought his own ship to New Zealand. And what had happened, I've got it in my notes here somewhere, they had been told, oh, here, in 1813, in November 1814, Kendall was ordered, right, by the magistrates in England that no more ships could land in New Zealand or discharge their sailors in New Zealand without first obtaining the permission of the chiefs of each place that they wanted to land, not just to New Zealand. Any place that the ship wanted to go to, they had to obtain the permission of the chiefs, is what was supposed to happen. And they also, the natives were no longer to be carried off on any of the ships and taken from the lands of New Zealand without the permission of the chiefs. So this happened in around about 1813. There were rules set in place. So the chiefs were all saying, all these ships are coming with all these Pākehā people, sailors and all these people, and they're dumping all these convicts in New Zealand, and they're not asking us, and then they're taking our Maori people, which are probably the slaves that Hongi Hika was providing. They're taking our Maori people and shipping them off to countries all around the world, and it's just heinous what was going on. So they tried to stop it, okay? But then this Marsden got his own ship and sent it to New Zealand without the permission of England and without the permission of the missionary society, apparently. And he goes to New Zealand, okay? So in 1822, both Marsden and Kendall were relieved of their posts for corruption, all the corruption and all the horrible things that they were doing, and they were thrown out, okay? But in 1824, Hongi Hika continued his rampage across the islands, and he still in 1824 took Auckland and took the Auckland harbours. And you must remember that, because it's going to come up later. In 1835, Whakaputanga, Declaration of Independence. Poor old Hongi Hika got a rough rap there, I think. So, now, we've got to come back here. Who remembers Jackie Marmon? Jackie Marmon, who went to New Zealand in 1805 when Ruatara was going to meet Marsden. Jackie Marmon was being sent to New Zealand to infiltrate the Maori tribes and learn their language, okay? Now, in 1823, he got deported he got convicted of a crime, so they say. It's very funny, because his father got gifted land in Australia in 1814. He did. And then, apparently, in 1823, Marmon, who was apparently raised in Australia, but a fluent Maori speaker. He was fluent. I mean, he spoke Maori better. He spoke Maori like a native Maori, but raised in Australia. So they say. So in 1823, apparently he committed a crime that he said he was innocent of, and he ended up in New Zealand, in the same area of Hongi Hika. Hongi Hika died in 1823, and he went with Hongi Hika to fight. In 1824, when they took Auckland, Jackie Marmon went along and fought alongside Hongi Hika. So 1822, Marsden's thrown out, Kendall's thrown out, and along comes Jackie Marmon. And he friendies up with Hongi Hika, and the two of them go and attack Auckland together. And then in 1824, who should turn up? Henry Williams turns up. Now, Henry Williams, he was also sent by the Church Missionary Society that are claiming that they're innocent in all of this. I'll believe you, but thousands wouldn't. You know what? I don't believe you. So he turns up from the Missionary Society, and guess what? He plays the peacemaker. He comes along and he says, I'm going to sort all this out for you tribes. Yeah, I'm going to, stop all this fighting for you, and I'm going to negotiate for you, and I'm going to give you this Declaration of Independence. Just turns up out of the blue, and he makes friends with Jackie Marmon, who's been around forever, with Marsden, Kendall, Ruatara, Hongi Hika. He knows them all. This guy's been around since he was 5 years old. So, and he comes along and makes friends with him, and then they're all friends with Hongi Hika there, and his brother comes, and his name is William Williams. William Williams, and we put Marmon away for a while, he comes up again later. William Williams and Henry Williams arrive in 1823, okay? And so they start negotiating with all the tribes. And in 1827, Hongi Hika started renouncing the missionaries. Hongi Hika started realising what they were doing, and he started saying, don't trust the missionaries. Whatever you do, they're here to take the country, is what he was saying. And Hongi Hika ended up being killed in 1827. On his deathbed, he said, don't trust them. He said, what did Hongi Hika say? Wish I could find. So Hongi Hika, I can't find it now, what he said. But anyway, wait for a minute. Anyway, he renounced the Church Missionary Society, and he said, don't trust them. And so he was killed in 1827. Now these two here, William Williams arrived in 1826. And I'll tell you something, there's something going on here. The Declaration of Independence for America was signed by a guy called William Williams. In 1811, now this is how you know they're all connected. William Williams signed the Declaration of Independence for the Connecticut colony in America. And he did that, and he also helped to ratify the Constitution in 1788. So in around about, in the 1800s, he was signing the Declaration of Independence in America, and he was with the Church Missionary Society, and his name was William Williams. Everybody's got the same name. It's like Charles, William Williams, and Samuel. You find they've all got the same names, and there's a reason. I don't know where their names are. They're born into it. It's planned for decades who's going to be going where. So Henry Williams turns up in 1823, and William Williams turns up in 1826. And William Williams doing the Declaration, which is not the same William Williams as this one, I think. No, he died. It's not the same William Williams. He did the Declaration of Independence in America. Okay, so, and that was by the Church Missionary Society for Canada, Australia. You have to do your research, America, do your research to what's going on. So we have to dig deep, find out what's going on, and save ourselves. All our countries are under decolonisation. We're going to be decolonised, and all the lands are going to be given to the Indigenous people and then given to these religious groups that are the Freemason and the Fabian societies that have been operating for 200 years in our countries. Don't blame us, white people. We're victims just as much. We were all brought as slaves as well. The Maoris were slaves. They were called Mokai. The English people were slaves, and the French and the Catholics just did not want to let the peon slaves go. And we were shipped to all of these countries, and we didn't even know it, but we were slaves, and we still are slaves today. And the sooner you wake up to that, the sooner we can get things fixed. So these two became the peacemakers. I'm almost finished now. And the interesting thing is they came in 1823. Now, in 1833, a printing press turned up in New Zealand, but it was no good, and it was broken. And in 1834, another William, a man called William Colenso, comes to New Zealand with a brand new, most modern printing press. And he gets some land. And in 1835, the Declaration of Independence, the Whakaputanga, was signed. And the people that signed the Whakaputanga was Henry Williams, Hobson, who I'm going to talk about later, and two Maori chiefs. Oh, no, sorry. Two, what do they call them? Maritime, so two sailors, and Henry Williams and Hobson, who was also commissioned by the Church Missionary Society. So these people were nothing to do with the Queen or the monarchy or anything like that. They were on their own mission, okay? And they were all Freemasons, of course. It was all planned. So I just want you to understand, we're going to finish up here because the next video we're going to talk about the Whakaputanga and the changes that they've just recently made. Billy Tikaka has just made a video that I've posted on my site, and he's just said that the Whakaputanga, or the Declaration of Independence, has been changed. And you hear him talking about a lot about his French ancestors and his Irish ancestors and the Catholics and all of those. And Henry Williams is the one that signed the Whakaputanga. He's the main honcho. So how the story ends up, to finish up the story, is that, all right, I'll just try and do it, and I'll just try and wing it and tell you that they had been going to New Zealand since 1805. And in 1805, they figured out that, you know, everybody was living there for 150 years peacefully, both Pākehā and Maori. All the tribes were living perhaps peacefully, perhaps they had a fight every now and then. The fights were hand-to-hand combat, and everybody had their club. It wasn't very nice, and nobody liked it. And but not many people got killed in that way, usually only a few. And so all the tribes generally kept to themselves, and I don't think anybody was attacking anybody. And when the Pākehā, the white people, went there and settled there, they let them settle there, and usually they just intermingled with the Maori and lived there happily together. And then when this missionary society started turning up in the 1800s, must have been around about 1807, 1808, and they realised that the lands could not have land ownership because it belonged only to the chiefs. And the only way to get it was by killing people. And even then it wasn't written on paper, so the missionary societies couldn't achieve their goal, which was to take the lands. And so they set about creating a Maori dictionary, which started in 1814, well, previously to that. And then, well, it must have been a couple of years in the making, because you can't just write those dictionaries in 1 minute. It would have taken a couple of years. So it was produced in 1815, and it must have been put together for a couple of 3 years before that from Ruatara, Marsden, and Kendall, who turned up in the 13th. They put together the dictionary, and then they sent it off to England, to Samuel Lee. And Samuel Lee put all of that vocabulary, verbs, nouns, adjectives, articles, all of that kind of thing, when he then created the grammatical structure of that. When he created the grammatical structure, he produced another dictionary, which was in 1820. And then Hongi Hika goes back to New Zealand. So now this missionary, oh, there's my phone, I'm not going to answer. Now the Missionary Society, Sam, can you turn off my phone, please? Go on, please. Oh, and now the 1820 dictionary, here, this is the complete Maori language, and that makes it its way back to New Zealand. And then in 1822, they throw out Marsden. He disappears conveniently. They throw out Kendall. He disappears conveniently. He turns up in Chile working on the tribes over there. So they throw them out, and they send in the two Williamses, the peacemakers, and they come in 1823, and then they also send in Hobson a wee bit later. So the Williamses, they set about, what would the Williamses have been doing? They get the dictionary in 1823, and it would have been set about, and I wouldn't even mind betting, this whakaputanga didn't just turn up in 1835. It's a very well written document. Now, I wouldn't mind betting that Samuel Lee was complicit in putting together this whakaputanga. The Maoris certainly didn't do it. Don't even kid yourself. And so from 1823 to 1833, so about 13 years, the Williamses had to make themselves known to be the peacemakers. So Hongi dies, Ruatara dies, everybody dies, and they go about their peacemaking between all of the tribes. They get all of the tribes to trust them. And in the meantime, while they're doing that, they're writing this whakaputanga. And it takes a few years to write those things. It would have been checked. It was written in English. It was then translated into Maori. So it was written perfectly, without a single mistake, in 2 languages, handwritten. I don't know. It was, from my understanding, it was handwritten in 2 languages. You weren't going to achieve that in 1 year. They only got the dictionary in 1820. They had to learn the language, and they relied a lot on Māmon and Hongi Hika. And they set about writing this whakaputanga, with the Declaration of Independence. In 1834, in 1833, the printing press turns up. They're ready for printing, but it conks out. In 1834, a brand new, updated printing press, paid for by the Missionary Society, of course, turns up, and they print off 60 copies of this Whakaputanga, and they send it around to all the Maori communities. And you know what? Nobody would sign it. Nobody wanted to sign. And they managed to get only 13 chiefs of the Ngāpuhi tribe. And we know that everything was done around the Ngāpuhi. And the Ngāpuhi tribe, who were very influenced, and anyway, I won't go into it. So the next video that we're going to do, we're still not going to talk about this flag, but I just want you to remember, because I am going to do a video about the flag. We've got to do the Whakaputanga first, but the flag's going to be coming up a lot in the next video. Which Maori signed the Declaration of Independence? Well, the original 13 Maori, there were only 13, and it was those original 13 when the 1840 treaty was signed. The first ones that had to sign it were all the 13 chiefs that signed the Whakaputanga. They had to sign first because they had signed this agreement with the missionaries. But as you can see from the story, the missionaries had set them all up, and thousands of people had been killed because of it. And the missionaries are saying, no, you know, we had nothing to do with that. And they sent in the Williams that spent 10 years infiltrating the tribes, playing the peacemakers and pretending that they were all innocent in all of this. But of course, I don't think they were. And then all they wanted was this Declaration of Independence signed. So we'll have to go back and look at that. Rosanna, I'm going to do the declaration next, is the next video. I've already half prepared it, but as you know, there's a lot of research, so I never know when it's going to come out. But we're doing the Declaration of Independence in the next video. But I just want you to remember this thing about the flag, that you have to remember. Why did they need the flag? It was because all these ships were coming in, and Marsden had created his own ship, and they were all coming into New Zealand, and the chiefs were writing to the king saying, we want this to stop. We don't want these ships coming here without our permission, and we don't want them unloading their white people anymore without our permission. And they were upset, but they had no power because they could not fight this Ngāpuhi tribe. So we're going to do it, good girl. All right, so that's the end of the video today. We'll see you all for the next video. But just remember that this Whakaputanga was, you know, it was 1808, 1805 to 1835. This Whakaputanga was 30 years in the making. They had to create a language, they had to create the grammar, they had to do many things before it was ever written. And that was not done by the Maori people. It was done by, you know, 2 Maori chiefs did all this. Not all the Maori chiefs did it. And they all did it behind the New Zealand Maori people's backs. None of these people could read or write. None of these people, even honki hika. And so the Whakaputanga, the Declaration of Independence, was not written by New Zealand Maori people, and it was not written by those chiefs either. They were manipulated into it, and it was produced in 1835. We're going to talk about it next video. Thank you very much. I never know how to end these videos, but hurry my, and goodbye. I'm going to have to turn it off and find the paper. Oh, shoot. What have I done? Find something here. Whoops. That goes there. Right. Now, never know how to turn this thing off. End the video. Yeah. End the video.